The dust motes danced in the buttery shafts of late afternoon light, each one a tiny, silent historian in the cavernous silence of the Atherton Library archives. I had come to think of them as the only witnesses to my slow, academic demise. My thesis, a monstrous, 80-page dissection of subversive pastoral themes in minor Jacobean poets, lay sprawled across the oak table like a patient etherized. It wasn't breathing. I wasn't breathing. For 3 months, my life had shrunk to the dimensions of this secluded corral, to the scent of decaying paper and lemon polish, to the relentless, quiet ticking of the grand clock in the main hall that seemed to be counting down the seconds to my inevitable failure. My world was a world of ghosts. The ghosts of long-dead poets, their ink-stained fingers pointing accusingly from the page. The ghost of my own ambition, a pale, shivering thing that had once been so robust. And the most potent ghost of all, the one who was infuriatingly, tangibly alive, Julian. He was a graduate tutor in the literature department, a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones by undergraduates and with a grudging respect by the tenured faculty. He was brilliant, patient, and, to my perpetually distracted mind, impossibly beautiful in a way that felt both classical and completely modern. I had orchestrated my entire schedule for a semester around the vague possibility of seeing him. I'd take the long route to the coffee cart just to pass the tutoring center. I'd linger in the stacks where the graduate research was shelved, pretending to be absorbed in some dense critical theory, while my entire consciousness was attuned to the sound of his low, even voice consulting with another student. He had this way of listening, a focused stillness that made you feel like you were the only person in the universe. I had craved that stillness, that focus, for longer than I cared to admit. But I was a coward, a voyeur in my own life, content to observe from the dusty periphery. That contentment shattered during a meeting with Professor Albright, a woman whose skeletal frame and sharp pronouncements seemed carved from granite. She'd peered at my latest draft over her spectacles, her silence stretching until my skin prickled with sweat. "Mr. Vance," she'd said finally, the words clipped and final. "This is not a thesis. This is a cry for help." She wasn't wrong. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the title page. "You have 1 month, and you will secure a tutor. I will not have my department's reputation sullied by this." She gestured at my pages with a look of profound disgust. The departmental secretary, a kind, weary woman named Carol, had given me the list. It was short. Most tutors were already booked solid with frantic undergrads. Then my eyes landed on his name, the last one on the page. Julian Croft. Availability, by appointment only. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. It was a terrible, wonderful, catastrophic idea. It was the only idea. I spent 2 days composing a 3-sentence email, each word weighed and measured as if it were part of a sonnet. I read it aloud, deleted it, rewrote it, and finally, in a fit of self-loathing and desperation, clicked send. He replied in under an hour. "Leo, of course. I have a cancellation tomorrow at 4. We can meet in my usual corral. 3rd floor archives, West Wing. It's quiet there. JC. Quiet." The word echoed in the silent scream of my anxiety. There would be nowhere to hide from that focused stillness. And so I found myself here, a day later, watching the dust motes and waiting for my ghost to materialize. He was late, which was unlike him, according to the departmental gossip I so shamelessly consumed. I had arrived 30 minutes early, laying out my pens in a perfect row, positioning my laptop at a precise 90-degree angle to my notebook, a pathetic attempt to project an aura of studious competence I did not feel. The scent of old books was thick, comforting. It was the only thing that was. Then I heard it, the soft tread of leather shoes on the worn marble floor outside the corral, the gentle click of the door. He stepped inside, and the air in the small space shifted, became denser, charged with a new energy. He was taller than I'd realized from my distant observations, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple gray sweater. His dark hair was a mess, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his olive skin was flushed. "Leo? Sorry I'm late," he said. His voice. It was exactly as I remembered from my eavesdropping, low and smooth, with a slightly rough edge, like worn velvet. It settled over my frayed nerves like a weighted blanket. Had to argue with procurement about a missing manuscript from the 17th century. You'd think they were guarding state secrets. He dropped a heavy leather satchel onto the floor and slid into the chair opposite me. The small table suddenly felt inadequate, a tiny raft in a vast ocean. I could smell him now, a clean, subtle scent of soap and something else, something warm and uniquely his. It wasn't cologne, it was just the scent of him. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his eyes were the color of dark honey, flecked with gold. The focused stillness I had admired from afar was now directed entirely at me. I felt pinned by it, exposed. "So," he said, leaning forward, lacing his long fingers together on the table. The gesture was casual, but it felt deliberate, a closing of the distance between us. "Professor Albright said you were having some trouble with the Jacobeans." He gave a small, wry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "They can be tricky bastards." I opened my mouth to say something intelligent, something that would justify my existence in this hallowed space with this brilliant man. What came out was a strangled squeak. I cleared my throat, my face burning. "Yeah, the pastoral illusions. Subversions. I think I'm lost." "Everyone gets lost," he said, his gaze unwavering. "The trick is knowing how to find your way back. Let's see what you've got." He reached for my manuscript, and his fingers, warm and calloused, brushed against mine as I pushed it across the table. The contact was electric, a tiny, brilliant spark that shot up my arm and settled, hot and heavy, in my chest. It was nothing. It was everything. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. He didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he gave no sign. He just pulled the pages toward him, his brow furrowing in concentration, and began to read. The clock in the hall chimed the quarter hour, and for the first time in months, I felt the terrifying, exhilarating flicker of hope. Our sessions fell into a rhythm. Twice a week, we met in that quiet corral, cocooned from the rest of the university. The world outside ceased to exist for those 2 hours. There was only the rustle of paper, the low murmur of Julian's voice, and the frantic, silent monologue in my own head. I became a scholar of him. I learned the way he chewed on the end of his pen when he was thinking, the specific shade of green that would appear in his hazel eyes when the afternoon light hit them just right. I learned the sound of his breathing, the soft inhale and exhale that was the only percussion in the room's deep silence. He was a phenomenal tutor. He didn't give me answers. He gave me questions. He'd trace a line of poetry with his index finger and say, "What's the poet not saying here, Leo? What's the ghost in this line?" He saw the architecture of arguments I couldn't, the hidden doorways and secret passages in the text that had felt like impenetrable fortresses. Under his guidance, my thesis began to take shape. It started to breathe on its own. But as my academic confidence grew, my personal composure disintegrated. The proximity was a sweet kind of torture. The small table was our entire world, and in this world, every accidental touch was a seismic event. When he'd lean over to point at a passage on my laptop screen, his arm would brush against mine, and the fine hairs would stand on end. I'd feel the warmth of his body, smell that clean, personal scent, and the words on the page would blur into an incomprehensible jumble. My brain would just shut down, flooded with sensory information it couldn't process. I began to analyze his every move with the same obsessive intensity one was supposed to be applying to 17th century verse. When his knee brushed against mine under the table, was it an accident? He didn't move it away immediately. It rested there for a full 10 seconds, a point of searing heat, before he shifted. My mind replayed those 10 seconds for hours afterward. I dissected the slight upturn of his lips. Was that a polite smile or a genuinely amused one? When he said, "Good work, Leo," and his eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary, what did it mean? Was it just encouragement, or was it something else? Something more. I was spiraling, lost in a labyrinth of my own making. He was my tutor. He was professional, kind, and dedicated. He was probably straight. This entire narrative was a fiction I was writing in my head to survive the aching loneliness of my life. I knew that, but the knowing didn't stop the hoping. One afternoon, I was particularly stuck on a chapter. My brain felt like a clogged drain. I'd been staring at the same paragraph for 20 minutes, the words swimming before my eyes. I must have let out a sigh of frustration, a sound heavier than I intended. Julian looked up from his own notes. "You're overthinking it," he said, his voice gentle. He reached across the table and, instead of pointing to the text, he lightly tapped my temple with 2 fingers. You're all up here. The answer isn't in your head. It's on the page. Breathe. His fingers were warm against my skin. The touch was brief, avuncular, completely innocent. But it felt like a brand. My entire body went rigid. I am breathing. I am breathing. My heart is a hummingbird in a cage. He held his hand there for a fraction of a second, his expression unreadable, and then pulled back. He folded his hands on the table, his gaze steady. Try reading it aloud, he suggested, as if he hadn't just casually dismantled my entire nervous system. Sometimes hearing the rhythm helps. I tried. My voice was shaky, a pale imitation of its normal register. But he was right. Hearing the words, feeling their meter in my mouth, unlocked something. The argument clicked into place. I started talking, the ideas pouring out, and he just listened, nodding slowly, a small, approving smile on his lips. When I finished, flushed with the rare victory of a breakthrough, I looked at him. See, he said softly. You had it in you all along. The praise felt disproportionately good. It wasn't just about the thesis anymore. It was about him. It was always about him. The session ended, and as we packed our bags, a comfortable silence settled between us. It was different from the academic silence of our work. It felt personal. You know, he said, slinging his satchel over his shoulder. You're one of the smartest students I've worked with. My face grew hot. I'm really not. You are, he insisted, his voice firm. He held the door open for me, and as I passed, his hand came to rest for a moment on the small of my back. It was a guiding gesture, polite and fleeting, but his palm was broad and warm, and the pressure, however light, felt possessive. It felt intentional. Or maybe I just wanted it to be. My mind raced, trying to catalog the sensation, to store it away for later analysis. The warmth spread through my lower back, a slow, creeping fire. I walked out of the archives that day feeling untethered, floating a few inches off the ground. The lines were blurring. The carefully constructed wall between tutor and student, between reality and my own desperate yearning, was beginning to crumble. And the most terrifying part was that I suspected Julian was the one dismantling it, stone by careful stone. The library incident happened on a Tuesday. It was late October, and a fierce, unseasonal storm had descended on the campus, lashing the Gothic windows of the archives with sheets of rain. The wind howled a mournful, lonely song. Inside our corral, the storm felt a world away. We were in our bubble of quiet concentration, the only light coming from the green-shaded lamp on our table, casting our faces in an intimate glow. We were making good progress, and for once, I felt a sense of calm focus. We should probably pack it in, Julian said, glancing at his watch. It's almost 9. They close in 5 minutes. I blinked, startled. The 2 hours had vanished in what felt like a moment. We gathered our things, the familiar routine of zipping bags and stacking books a comfortable ritual. As we stepped out of the corral, the main archive room was dark and cavernously empty. The only light was a dim emergency bulb glowing far down the main aisle. Hello, Julian called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. The only answer was the drumming of rain against the glass. We walked to the heavy iron gate that separated the archives from the main library. It was locked. A thick chain was looped through the bars, secured with a heavy-duty padlock. A cold knot of panic tightened in my stomach. They locked us in. Julian tested the gate, rattling it uselessly. Seems so. Old Henderson on the security desk must have done his sweep without checking the carols. He's deaf as a post. He didn't sound panicked, more resigned. He pulled out his phone. No signal, of course. These walls are a foot thick. He turned to me, and in the dim light, I could just make out the faint, amused curve of his lips. Well, looks like we're spending the night. My panic sharpened into something closer to terror. An entire night. Trapped in here. With him. The thought was both horrifying and thrilling. It was a scenario my overactive imagination might have cooked up in a particularly feverish dream. What are we going to do? I asked, my voice a little too high. Not much we can do, he said calmly. He shrugged off his satchel and leaned it against the gate. We wait. Someone will find us in the morning. He walked over to one of the large reading tables and gestured for me to follow. Might as well get comfortable. Comfortable was the last thing I felt. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat down opposite him, the wide table feeling like an impassable chasm in the darkness. The initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a strange, surreal calm. The storm outside provided a constant, soothing white noise. The air smelled of rain and old paper. It was peaceful. For a long time, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't the charged, analytical silence of our sessions. It was something else. A shared, quiet space. I watched his silhouette, the way the dim light caught the sharp line of his jaw. "Are you okay?" he asked finally, his voice soft in the dark. "Yeah, I lied. Just, this is weird." "Weird is one word for it," he chuckled. The sound was warm, intimate in the enclosed space. "Could be worse. At least we have several hundred years of literature for company," he paused. "So, Leo Vance, aside from your obsession with obscure poets, what do you actually want to do when you escape this place?" The question caught me off guard. No one ever asked me that. They asked about my major, my grades, my thesis. Not about me. The shift from tutor to something else was jarring. "I don't know," I admitted, the truth of it feeling heavy in my chest. "I haven't really thought past next month. Past this paper." "You should," he said. "This paper is a hurdle. It's not the finish line." He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "I used to think it was. I was going to be the next great academic. Uncover some lost Shakespearean folio, get a cushy tenure-track position, and slowly fossilize in a tweed jacket." I could hear the self-deprecation in his tone. "What happened?" He was silent for a moment. "I realized I was more interested in the people reading the books than the books themselves. I like watching the lights come on for a student. Like with you today. That moment you figured out that chapter. That's the good stuff. That's real." He was talking about me. He saw me. It was a simple admission, but it felt like a seismic revelation. He wasn't just going through the motions. He was paying attention. He was present. He was vulnerable, sharing a piece of himself that had nothing to do with iambic pentameter or deconstructionist theory. "I never thought of it like that," I said quietly. "Most people don't," he replied. "They see the grade, the degree. They forget there's a person behind it all." He shifted in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "What about you, Leo? What makes you feel real?" "I am here, in the dark, talking to you. This feels real." The words were on the tip of my tongue, so potent and true that it was a physical effort to hold them back. My throat felt tight. I like building things," I said instead, the confession feeling small and silly. "With my hands. Furniture. Little wooden boxes. It's quiet. You just focus on the wood, the grain. It makes sense. There's no subtext." He didn't laugh. He was quiet for a moment, and I imagined him processing this, filing it away. "That doesn't sound silly at all," he said. "It sounds like you know how to create order out of chaos. That's a rare skill. It's basically what we're trying to do with your thesis." He connected it. He connected my small, secret hobby to our work, to me. He made it valid. A warmth bloomed in my chest that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with a feeling I couldn't name. It felt like being seen. Truly seen. We talked for hours. We talked about movies we liked, about terrible summer jobs, about the first albums we ever bought. He had a dry, witty sense of humor that emerged when he wasn't in tutor mode. I found myself laughing, the sound rusty from disuse, but genuine. I told him about growing up in a small town, about feeling like I was always on the outside looking in. I didn't say why, not explicitly, but I felt like he understood. He just listened, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor in the dark. At some point, the exhaustion hit me like a wave. I slumped forward, my head resting on my arms on the cool surface of the table. I was so tired. "Get some sleep," Julian's voice said, seeming to come from very close by. I felt a weight settle over my shoulders. It was his sweater. It was heavy and warm, and it smelled of him. I pulled it tighter around myself, a pathetic attempt at subtlety, and inhaled. The scent was comforting, safe. I drifted off to the sound of the rain and Julian's quiet breathing, wrapped in his warmth. For the first time, the ghost in the library felt less like a ghost and more like a man, and I was more terrified than ever. After the night in the library, everything was different. The change was subtle, a shift in the atmospheric pressure between us. The line between tutor and student, already blurred, had been all but erased. Our sessions were still focused on the thesis, but they were threaded through with an easy familiarity that hadn't existed before. We talked about our weekends. He asked me how the bookshelf I was building was coming along. I asked him if procurement had ever found his missing 17th century manuscript. They had. It had been misfiled under agriculture. The touches became more frequent, less ambiguous. He'd lean in to read something on my screen, and his hand would rest on my shoulder, no longer a fleeting gesture, but a settled weight. He'd pass me a book, and his fingers would deliberately trace over mine. Each time, my system would short-circuit. A jolt, a flash of heat, a frantic internal monologue screaming, "This is real. This is happening," followed immediately by the cool voice of reason. "It means nothing. He's just a tactile person. You are projecting." My life became a binary. There was the gray, muted world outside our corral, and then there was the vibrant, terrifying, hyper-saturated world inside it. I was living for those 2-hour blocks, twice a week. The rest was just waiting. The thesis was nearly done. It was strong, coherent, and something I was genuinely proud of. It was our creation, but its completion loomed over me like an executioner's axe. When it was finished, I would have no reason to see him anymore. The thought was a physical ache in my chest. The deadline was a Friday. Our last session was scheduled for the Wednesday before. The final read-through. I walked to the library that afternoon with a sense of profound dread. This was it. The end. I was rehearsing my thank you speech, trying to sound grateful and professional, not like a man whose entire world was about to go dark. He was already there when I arrived, the green lamp casting its familiar glow. But something was off. The air was tense. He wasn't reading or making notes. He was just staring at the wall, his jaw tight. "Hey," I said, my voice uncertain. He looked up, and his eyes were dark, stormy. He managed a smile, but it was a strained, hollow thing. "Leo." "Hi. Sit down." I sat. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I now knew meant he was stressed or agitated. "Yeah. No. It's all right." My stomach dropped. "My thesis. Did she see it? Does she hate it?" "No, God no," he said quickly. "The thesis is brilliant. She'll love it." He let out a harsh sigh. "She cornered me this morning. Asked how the tutoring was going. I told her it was going well, that you were on track to produce an exceptional piece of work." He paused, his gaze fixed on my face. "And then she told me she was glad I was able to straighten you out." Her words. The ugly, casual cruelty of the phrase hung in the air between us. It was a thinly veiled jab at my quietness, my social awkwardness, but I knew what it really meant. It was a word people like her used as a weapon. "And then," Julian continued, his voice low and laced with a cold anger I had never heard before, "she said it was good of me to take on a sensitive case like you. That she hoped I wasn't getting too friendly." My face burned with shame. I felt exposed, dissected. She saw it. She saw my pathetic, unspoken crush and twisted it into something sordid, a problem to be managed. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. "I'm sorry," I whispered, staring at the scarred surface of the table. I never meant to make things awkward for you." "Leo," his voice was sharp, commanding. I forced myself to look at him. His eyes were blazing. "Do not apologize. You have done nothing wrong. This is not on you. This is on her. On her prejudice and her miserable little life." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "But it does mean we have a problem." "I'll stop the sessions," I said immediately. "The paper is done. I can submit it. We don't have to." "No," he cut me off. "That's letting her win." He looked at me, his expression intense, searching. "But I have to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me." My heart was a jackhammer. This is it. The confrontation. He's going to ask if I have feelings for him. He's going to let me down gently, professionally. The dream is over. "Okay," I breathed. He held my gaze. The silence in the corral was absolute. "Are we going to talk about it, Leo?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Or are you just going to keep staring at my mouth every time I speak?" The question was a detonation. It blew through all my defenses, all my careful evasions and plausible deniability. He knew. Of course he knew. He had known all along. The heat in my face was unbearable. My mind went completely, utterly blank. There were no words, no witty replies, no academic theories to hide behind. There was only the raw, terrifying truth hanging in the air between us. I am breaking. This is the moment where everything I have carefully constructed shatters. The room feels airless, the green glow of the lamp suffocating. My thoughts are a frantic scramble, a flock of birds startled into flight. He sees me. He sees everything. The way my eyes trace the curve of his lips when he explains a difficult concept. The way I hold my breath when he leans in close. The way my entire being is a quiet, desperate scream for him. My own mouth is dry. I can't form a response. The silence is a living thing, expanding to fill every corner of the small room, pressing in on me. His eyes, those dark honey eyes, are not accusatory. They are not mocking. They are waiting. They are open, holding a question that is so much bigger than the words he just spoke. The sound that escapes my throat is a pathetic croak. I feel a tremor start in my hands, a fine, uncontrollable shaking. I press my palms flat against the cool wood of the table to still them. My gaze drops from his. I can't hold it. It's too much. I stare at the intricate grain of the oak, the dark whorls and light streaks, a tiny, knowable universe in the midst of overwhelming chaos. I can't focus. I whisper to the table. The admission is a crack in the dam. I haven't been able to focus for weeks. Not when you're here. The words keep tumbling out, quiet and broken. I try to listen to what you're saying about meter and caesura, but all I can hear is the sound of your voice. I try to read the page, but all I see is your hand next to mine. I finally risk a glance at him. He hasn't moved. His expression is one of intense, unwavering concentration, the same look he gets when he's wrestling with a particularly dense piece of text. But this time, I am the text. He is reading me. I'm sorry. I say, the useless, reflexive words of a cornered animal. I know it's inappropriate. You're my tutor. I've made this impossible. He lets out a breath, a slow, deliberate exhalation. A muscle in his jaw clenches and then releases. He finally moves, pushing his chair back with a soft scrape against the floor. He stands up, and for a terrifying second, I think he's going to leave. He's going to walk out, and this will be our last, excruciating memory. Instead, he walks around the small table. He stops beside my chair, so close I can feel the heat radiating from his body. I keep my eyes fixed on the table, my neck stiff, unable to look up at him. I am bracing for the rejection, the gentle but firm speech about professional boundaries. His hand settles on my shoulder. His thumb begins to draw slow, soothing circles against the tense muscle there. The touch is not professional. It is not avuncular. It is deliberate, possessive, and deeply, shockingly intimate. Leo, he says, his voice low and right beside my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. Look at me. It takes every ounce of courage I possess, but I slowly lift my head. His face is inches from mine. His eyes are dark, searching, and filled with an emotion I can't decipher. It looks like relief. Do you think you're the only one who's been unable to focus? He asks softly. Do you have any idea how many times I've completely lost my train of thought because you were biting your lip? Or the way the light from this stupid lamp catches in your hair? The world tilts on its axis. My carefully constructed narrative, the one where I am the silent, longing observer and he is the unattainable object, shatters into a million glittering pieces. He feels it too. He feels it too. I have been waiting, he says, his voice a low rumble that vibrates through me. For you to be ready. For you to see it. He reaches down and takes my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. His grip is firm, sure. He pulls me gently to my feet. We are standing in the narrow space between the table and the bookshelf, our bodies almost touching. Albright was right about one thing. He murmurs, his gaze dropping to my mouth. Things have gotten friendly. My breath catches in my throat. This is happening. This is real. He doesn't rush. His other hand comes up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The gesture is so tender it makes my knees weak. He watches me, his eyes asking a final, silent question. I give a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Permission granted. Permission yearned for. The first kiss is not a collision. It is a discovery. His lips are soft, hesitant at first, a gentle pressure against mine. It is a question. My response is to lean into him, to close the last fraction of an inch between us, and the kiss deepens. It's a slow, languid exploration, a release of months of unspoken tension, of longing looks and accidental touches. It tastes of coffee and old books and a profound, bone-deep relief. It feels like coming home. He pulls back slightly, just enough to rest his forehead against mine. His eyes are closed. I can feel his breath on my lips, warm and steady. My hands, of their own accord, have found their way to his waist, gripping the soft fabric of his sweater. So much for the thesis. I whisper, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. A low chuckle rumbles in his chest. To hell with the thesis. He kisses me again, and this time there is no hesitation. It's deeper, more confident, acclaiming. His hand tangles in my hair, tilting my head back as his tongue gently traces the seam of my lips. I open for him, a silent invitation, and the kiss becomes something else entirely. It's no longer just a relief. It's a conversation, a mapping of new territory. It is everything I had imagined in my loneliest moments, but 1,000 times more real, more potent. The sound of footsteps in the main archive hall, distant but distinct, breaks the spell. We pull apart, our breathing ragged. The reality of where we are crashes back in. A public library. A glass-walled corral. Julian looks toward the door, his expression unreadable. He turns back to me, a decisive glint in his eye. He walks over to the small door and, with a smooth, deliberate motion, draws the narrow privacy curtain across the window, plunging us into a soft, intimate twilight. He turns back to me, and the look on his face is a mixture of raw want and a kind of fierce tenderness that makes my heart ache. He doesn't say a word. He just crosses the small space, backs me up against the edge of the heavy oak desk until the cool wood presses against my lower back. He places his hands on my hips, strong and sure. And then, with an ease that steals the breath from my lungs, he lifts me, seating me on the edge of the desk. The world shifts. I am looking down at him now, my legs bracketing his hips. The change in perspective is dizzying, electrifying. He steps between my knees, crowding into my space, his body a warm, solid presence against mine. The desk is cool and hard beneath my hands. He is warm and vital in front of me. He rests his hands on my thighs, his thumbs drawing lazy circles on the denim of my jeans, sending sparks of fire up my legs. The air is thick with everything left unsaid, with the raw, undeniable chemistry that has been simmering between us for months. This is no longer about a thesis, or a library, or Professor Albright. This is just us. My heart picks up its frantic pace. Leo, he says, his voice thick, and the sound of my name on his lips is a revelation. He looks up at me, his eyes dark with an emotion so potent it feels like I could drown in it. He leans in, and the world narrows to this single point, this moment of impossible, breathtaking intimacy. The scent of him, the heat of him, the solid presence of him. It's overwhelming, and all I can do is hold on. The bubble of our new reality popped the next morning. After a long, charged night of talking and kissing, and simply being in each other's presence until the library opened, we finished the final edits on my thesis in a state of dazed, surreal silence. The words on the page felt foreign, relics from a different lifetime. Every time our hands brushed reaching for the mouse, a fresh jolt went through me. We were two magnets, constantly aware of the pull between us. I submitted the thesis online from the corral, the final click of the mouse feeling both momentous and anticlimactic. It was done. The official reason for our connection, the thing that had brought him into my life, was gone. A cold dread began to seep into the edges of my euphoria. What now? The walk out of the library was agonizingly awkward. The bright morning light felt harsh and exposing after the intimate cocoon of the archives. What were the rules for this? Do you say goodbye to the man you just spent hours kissing the same way you say goodbye to your tutor? Well, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the open air. Thank you. For everything. The thesis. I couldn't have done it without you. Leo, he started, his expression serious. But I couldn't hear it. Panic, my old, familiar friend, was screaming in my ear. It was a mistake. A stress-induced lapse in judgment. He was just being kind. Now that the thesis was done, he would retreat back into his professional life, and I would be left with the memory of what I'd been stupid enough to believe was real. I have to go, I interrupted, unable to meet his eyes. I have a thing. It was the lamest excuse in human history, but it was all I could manage. Before he could respond, I turned and practically fled, my heart pounding with a familiar, miserable rhythm. I didn't look back. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. I hid in my cramped apartment, the silence amplifying my anxious thoughts. I replayed every moment from the library, analyzing it, dissecting it until it lost all meaning. The tenderness in his eyes, the warmth of his hands, the taste of his kiss. It all started to feel like a dream, a fiction my lonely mind had conjured. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from him. "Are you free for coffee?" My thumb hovered over the screen, my entire body rigid with indecision. Replying felt like stepping off a cliff. What if I'd read it all wrong? The humiliation would be unbearable. So I did what I always did. I did nothing. I let the message sit there, unanswered, a glowing beacon of my own cowardice. Another text arrived a few hours later. "Leo, are you okay?" This one was worse. The simple, direct concern cut through my anxiety and struck something deeper. I was being a fool, and I was hurting him. But the fear was a paralysis, holding me hostage in my own apartment. The next morning, a knock on my door made me jump so violently I sloshed coffee onto my shirt. I froze. I didn't get visitors. Ever. The knock came again, firmer this time. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew who it was. I could feel his presence through the cheap wood of the door. I thought about pretending I wasn't home, but it felt like the most profound act of cowardice I could commit. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I walked to the door and opened it. Julian was standing there, looking rumpled and tired, as if he hadn't slept. He was wearing a faded university sweatshirt and jeans. He wasn't holding a briefcase full of books. He was holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He looked uncertain. It was an expression I had never seen on him before, and it did more to shatter my anxiety than anything else could have. He held one of the cups out to me. "I figured you might need this," he said, his voice quiet. I took it, my fingers brushing against his. The familiar spark was there, a quiet confirmation. "You didn't have to do that," I mumbled, not meeting his eyes. "Yes, I did," he said. He didn't try to push his way in. He just stood on my doorstep, waiting. Because I was worried. And because I think we need to talk, he finally looked me in the eye, his gaze steady and clear. "That wasn't about the thesis, Leo. Not for me." The simple, direct statement was a lifeline. It was the reassurance I had been too afraid to ask for. He wasn't running. He wasn't retreating. He was here, on my shabby welcome mat, with a peace offering of caffeine. "I know," I whispered, the admission a huge relief. "Me neither." A slow smile spread across his face, a real one, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Good. Can I come in, then? Or are we going to have our first official, non-academic conversation in your hallway?" The internal test was fierce. My apartment was a reflection of my life, cluttered, a little worn, deeply personal. The bookshelf I was building sat half-finished in the corner, a testament to my arrested development. Letting him in felt like a final surrender, a baring of the soul. My instinct was to protect, to hide, to keep him in the sanitized, neutral territory of the library. But his eyes were so open, so patient. He wasn't judging. He was just here. He had crossed the campus to find me. He had brought me coffee. He was waiting for me to be brave enough to open the door a little wider. I stepped back, pulling the door with me. "Come in." He walked into my small living room, his presence instantly making the space feel both smaller and more complete. He didn't comment on the piles of books or the half-finished projects. His eyes landed on the bookshelf. "This is what you were telling me about," he said, walking over to it. He ran a hand over the smooth, sanded pine. "It's beautiful, Leo. The joinery is perfect." The praise, so specific and knowledgeable, made my chest ache with a strange, unfamiliar happiness. He had listened. He had remembered. "It's not finished," I said, the reflexive self-deprecation springing to my lips. "Nothing worth having ever is, right away," he said, turning to face me. "It takes time. You have to be patient with it. You can't rush it." He wasn't talking about the bookshelf anymore. The test wasn't about him. It was about me. It was the lingering fear, the ingrained belief that I was not someone worthy of this kind of attention, this kind of direct, uncomplicated affection. It was the voice in my head that whispered, "He'll get bored. He'll realize you're not as interesting as some obscure poem, and he'll leave." The conflict was a silent war waged in the space of a few heartbeats. I looked at him, really looked at him, standing there in my messy living room, holding a cup of rapidly cooling coffee, a hopeful, waiting look on his face. And for the first time, Another voice spoke up, quieter but clearer. What if he stays? That was the conscious choice. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was a small, quiet decision to trust him, to trust this fragile, nascent thing between us. It was the choice to believe in the evidence of his presence over the fiction of my own fear. "Do you want to sit down?" I asked, gesturing toward my worn, comfortable sofa. "I'd love that," he said. We sat, not too close, but not too far apart either. A comfortable distance. We drank our coffee. We talked. We didn't talk about the thesis or the library or Professor Albright. We talked about the future. He told me about an offer he had for a teaching position at a small college in Vermont. I told him I was thinking of applying to a woodworking apprenticeship program. We talked about things that were real, things that existed beyond the Gothic walls of the university. As we talked, the space between us on the sofa seemed to shrink. Our knees brushed. This time, neither of us pulled away. I felt the warmth of him, a steady, reassuring presence. I leaned my head back against the cushions and closed my eyes, just for a second, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. When I opened them, he was watching me, a soft, tender look on his face. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine on the faded upholstery of the couch. His hand was warm and strong and real. We sat like that for a long time, in a comfortable, easy silence, the afternoon light slanting through the dusty window. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic moment. There was no soaring music, no breathless declarations. It was quiet. It was simple. It was two people, sitting on a couch, holding hands. And it was more than enough. My final reflection came later that evening, long after Julian had gone, promising to call me the next day. I stood in the middle of my living room, the scent of his coffee still faint in the air. I looked at the half-finished bookshelf, at the piles of books I suddenly felt eager to read for pleasure instead of obligation, at the dent in the sofa cushion where he had sat. My small, lonely world had been irrevocably altered. It had been cracked open to let someone else in. For years, I had been an observer, a narrator of a life I wasn't truly living. I'd watched from the periphery, from the dusty corners of libraries and the back rows of lecture halls, convinced that was my designated place. I had mistaken loneliness for safety. Julian hadn't dragged me out of that life. He had simply walked in, sat down, and waited for me to realize I didn't have to live there anymore. He hadn't fixed me. He had just seen me, whole and complete, and decided to stay. I thought about the man who had nervously emailed a tutor a few months ago, a ghost haunting the archives. He was terrified of being seen. Now, the thing I wanted most was to be seen by Julian, every day. The journey from that corral to this couch felt immense, a crossing of a vast, emotional distance. I no longer felt like a student or a case file. I felt like Leo. A sense of quiet hope settled in my chest, solid and warm. I didn't know what would happen with Vermont or the apprenticeship. The future was still a vast, unwritten page. But for the first time, it didn't look like a terrifying void. It looked like a possibility. It looked like a beginning. I walked over to the bookshelf, picked up a piece of sandpaper, and got back to work. I finally felt like I was building something that would last. I felt like I'd come home.